welcome to those joining us for this afternoon session on gender and energy poverty. I would like you to ask when the presenters are presenting to unmute, to mute your microphone and switch off your camera to use the bandwidth as much as possible. You can post any questions or comments in the chat function of the session, which will be monitored by us and the host of the conference. We will start up with two warming up questions to get you into, well, the mindset of gender and energy poverty before we go on to the presentations. So we invite you to go to this website, menti.com, use the code, which is also in the chat function, 42216662. And there you find two questions. The first one is, why do you think gender is important for energy poverty and transitions? And the second one is, what gender aspects are we currently missing in energy poverty and transition policies? So I would rather invite you to answer these questions with your common understanding of the topic right now, your background, both in academia or in policy making or in from a practitioner's point of view. So we can discuss them later and see what your notices are of this topic. I see some familiar faces. Hi, Harriet. Nice to see you. Great. So if there's any questions or you can't find the Menti board, then please let us know, use the chat, and take your time to answer the questions and to get yourself prepared for this interactive session on gender and energy poverty. So when we see the first answers popping up in the Menti board, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our panelist of this morning, of this afternoon, sorry, or morning, depending on your time zone. This afternoon we have we start with a presentation of Saska Petrovna from the University of Manchester. Then Tabiseng Molakoana from the University of Stellenbosch will share her insights on gender and energy poverty policies in South Africa and her research on that topic. And Carmen Sanchez Guevara from the University of Madrid will share her research and involvement in the FEMAMET project and the results from that project. The presentations will be taking roughly 50 minutes each, and I will ask you and invite you to ask questions in the chat, and hopefully there will be some time to discuss. Also, I would like to introduce you to Professor Joy Clancy, who will be available throughout this whole session to respond and reflect on the presentations and to monitor the different reactions as well. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Marielle Veenstra. I'm working on gender and energy policy, and I'm working with all these amazing women together in different projects and different publications as well on gender and energy poverty and gender and energy transition. So after you got this introduction on gender and energy poverty from this through the presentations, we will have a short break at the top of the hour, just a couple of minutes to stretch your legs, and then we move on to the interactive workshop session that will be hosted by Sergio Tirado from University of Barcelona and Katrina Havensberg, who will be co-hosting the interactive workshop session. And Sergio will provide an introduction at the top of the hour to introduce this interactive part. So I'm not quite sure whether we're still at the Menti board. I can't see the board right now out there. Whoops. I see we already start quite an interesting discussion here. I don't know, Joy, are you able to give a first impression or reaction?
Well, because I've also had the opportunity of seeing what speakers are going to say beforehand, and I think that a lot of what is coming up in the Menti board is actually touched on by the speakers. So I think that's. I think one thing that that Saskia is, well, yeah, is it gender or women? I think that's a very interesting, as yet still unresolved issue. So I don't want to steal what Saskia is going to say.
Yeah, indeed, excellent comment on that. So without further ado, then I give the floor to Saskia. Please pay your attention to her presentation. The Menti board will still be running. But so we will we'll have a look at that later on during the discussion. But for now, I give the floor to Saskia, and please unmute your phone, your microphone, and switch off your camera while she's presenting. There you go, Saskia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me first thank the organizer for actually bringing us all together today and for organizing this session. So thank you, Marielle. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, and Liz and all the others who've been involved in this. Also, thank you, Joy, for announcing my presentation as well. And I just would like to say that if there are any comments or anything, I'm here basically to learn more about the relationship between gender and energy, rather than just talk about my impressions and my points of view based on my research. Before I start my presentation, I just would like to explain this picture that I took at the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester. This is a picture I took this picture of a sculpture of electricity, which is presented in the image of a goddess. And the sculpture was made by Charles Octave Levy for the International Fair in Paris in 1881. And unfortunately, you can't see that here, but electricity is holding a new technology in her hand, which is the the light bulb, sorry, that was quite an innovative thing at that time. Can we please go to the second slide? So I showed that picture, or I took that picture because I've been very much interested in that kind of division that exists in terms of gender when we talk about energy production and energy demand. And historically speaking, the kind of the gender, this kind of demand and production have been gendered to begin with. So demand has very often been presented as a feminine issue. And here, this is another section from the museum in Manchester, which is on electricity. And here we can see that, for example, in the early 20th century, a specific organization, which was called the Electrical Development Association, and the Electrical Association for Women was developed was actually established in the country to promote the use of electricity in homes and to, in a way, increase the demand for electricity in homes. And the role of specific women, like here we have Dame Caroline Haslett, have been really instrumental in the kind of like in the promotion of that demand for electricity. Also, the kind of the role of these associations have been was a bit broader, sorry. So they were also there to educate mostly women as homemakers to basically to use electricity in a safe way, and also to communicate the voices of women in this kind of broader development in relation to how electricity was used in the country. So while the demand has been historically very much a feminine issue, on the other side, we have something that academics like, for example, Cara Daggett call petromasculinities, which are very much linked to the way in which energy is produced, and especially energy produced from fossil sources. So for me and in my research, I have been very much interested in the kind of like the possibility to bridge the gap between these two kind of divisions in between petromasculinities and more of the feminine energy use or demand. Can we please go to the next slide? In the meantime, of course, there have been many other processes that try to kind of to pay attention to the role, especially of women in terms of gender inequality in relation to STEM. So there have been the Women's History Month, and especially here the kind of the emphasis on women in STEM. And then the next slide, please. And also we know that at the European Union level, there have been many studies undertaken. Joyce here, she can tell us more about some of the reports they have prepared for the European Commission in terms of different types of gender inequalities in regards to energy. And of course, Joy, the Energy Network, we should mention it as well, which in a way try to kind of, or have tried to bridge that gap between energy demand and energy production. And the next slide, please. What is interesting here is to see the kind of the embedded, how, for example, energy poverty is constitutive of and constituted in gender inequalities, especially in the time of crisis. And this is quite interesting because we can see crisis and as breaking points that can reveal some of the embedded and historic gendered inequalities in relation to energy, but they can also provide an opportunity to actually revisit some of the stereotypical thinking or stereotypical roles of gendered roles in households and in our society. It would be interesting, for example, to see how COVID-19 has changed or has in a way challenged some of those gendered roles, not only in our homes but also in our society as well in relation to energy. Can we just go to the next one, please? Still, the kind of the public discourse whenever we talk about poverty or vulnerability tend to be in relation to women and children. And this is another photo that I took of an exhibition that basically tried to talk about about energy poverty. And again, most of the photos were about women and children, no description, no context, and no agency, which can be quite an issue. And if we go to the next slide. So what I would like to hear to talk about briefly is about this kind of emerging but very welcoming research on the kind of geographies of energy, energy poverty and gender. I'm really happy to see that there is more and more research, and I can't wait to hear, for example, some of the findings from different projects that are taking place in Europe, in different European countries, and more globally, for example, in the fantastic presentation on South Africa that I can't wait to hear about. So that's very good. We're kind of thinking, and we are going, we are basically drawing inspiration from Joy's work and other people who have said that climate change, let's say, research and energy research linked to that should not be gender blind. But what we kind of tend to maybe sometimes not to forget, but to really maybe address more carefully is the distinction between women and energy and gender and energy, which in a way remains unclear. I think this is very important, especially when we try to make policy recommendations, because as we know, gender roles can be quite that those are socially constructed roles, and the context in which they are explored can be quite different. So it's so we should take into consideration the kind of like the historically embedded socially, let's say the social constructions of gender in different contexts. And especially, I'm a bit worried when we talk about biological or physiological characteristics of women rather than gender characteristics, because in that case, what in a bit makes me a bit anxious is that we can, in a way, reproduce some of the already existing inequalities and injustices. I would like to see a more kind of to talk about more the way that we can empower not only women, but in a way that we can make our society more just, and that in a way that where we can actually talk about this kind of different gendered roles in relation to energy poverty. Because what I'm worried here about is this kind of romanticized notion of women care and homemaking. And we can see that even more in relation to COVID-19. And to be honest, as a woman, I'm sick of being the one who should care, or the only one who should care. I mean, I think care is something that should be taken into consideration more broadly in relation to gender equality. And it's nice to use like kind of more kind of critical feminist thinking in relation to care, where different people can be included, and not necessarily only women, because that can create like a false notion that only women can empower themselves through their kind of practices of care. In that case, I'm just a bit worried that in that case, women can take even bigger burden on themselves and on their shoulder, and the expectations of that kind of specific sex, if we talk about women, can be even increased, and as a result, even further marginalized. On the other hand, we have had a lot of research that shows some kind of like forms of empowerment of women, especially through including them in different types of energy embedded economic activities. And we can see that from different countries. Like we had a project in South Africa. That's why I can't wait to hear about that presentation as well, just to see how our basically findings compare. But women have been seen as almost leaders of low carbon transitions, which is fine, which is very positive. And where here we talk about the other part of the energy chain, the energy production. But I would like to see like a bit more like critical thinking in a way that, what about, for example, what is that that can actually kind of decrease the burden of women on the burden on women in terms of like low carbon energy transitions, and in a way to provide that empowerment. I'm just worried that instead of kind of using technologies to decrease the burden on women, we can end up in a situation where women will be responsible in kind of like promoting as that sculpture, promoting new technologies, and increasing the burden on their shoulders, and actually being involved more, undertaking more of the jobs and labor, rather than thinking about that equal distribution, and more of the politics of how we value, for example, labor and care. Can we just go to the next one, please? So this is an interesting. There was an interesting paper that was published just recently, and that tries to kind of critically discuss the difference between gender and sex in existing energy studies. I find it quite refreshing, to be honest, because it actually tries to unpack some of the complexity and what it means to talk about different genders rather than different sexes when we talk about energy poverty and energy deprivation. And can we go to the next one, please? So just some. These are not really conclusions. These are more like this is just more like food for thought, if you can see it like that. It's interesting to see, or I have seen, for example, energy poverty more as or I have studied it as an emotional experience by different households in different contexts. But I have been interested in studying it as a politically induced injustice as well. So rather than focusing on households and in the domestic realm, I'm more interested in the kind of like the politics of energy governance, and how this kind of our new research can, in a way, inform the politics of energy governance that can be more just. I'm a bit worried that, especially as a result of COVID-19 and the new how COVID-19 will affect, for example, the new forms of energy production. We have been very hopeful in relation to this kind of new renewable energy, and in that case, thinking more about the gender inequality issues in relation to that. But we can also see that in many contexts, we are going back to some of these very masculine ways of energy production, like coal in the UK context, or gas, natural gas, and so on. So it would be interesting to see that dynamic over there and how that will reflect on the domestic realm. It would be interesting to see, for example, the relations or the effects, implications of COVID-19 on the domestic distribution of energy related practices, and how for example, the power dynamic in the home has changed as a result of COVID-19, because we are all stuck in our homes. And it's interesting to see that kind of the difference between seeing our homes as sanctuaries, as seeing our homes as prisons as well, in relation to energy and gender. So quite a few new avenues, actually, and quite a few new questions that can be explored. And I'm really looking forward to kind of to discussing this in a greater detail. And if we go just to the next slide, and I'm going to and my presentations here. So most of these kind of findings are coming, or most of these insights are based on findings from different projects, as I said. And sorry for the shameless promotion here of my papers. That's not the point. The point is just like if you want to kind of do to see the background of my thinking and how these ideas have developed, you may want to check at these two papers. But otherwise, thank you for your attention. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the other presentations and to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Saska, and very interesting indeed. And thank you for also sharing your more recent work. Any reaction, Joy?
Lots, but I don't have the time. Thank you, Saska. But you and I are involved in a project together, so we can discuss this in more detail. Just a couple of quick reactions. I think your comment about historical embedding is important, not only for the reason you said, but I think if we look backwards and then see where we are today, we can see how much things have changed. There's still a lot to change, as you've rightly pointed out, and we're going to hear from our other speakers. But I do think it gives us a sense of hope that things can change. It is possible to change. I also, I think also your comment, which I think is going to come back, particularly in Carmen's presentation, links to, I think, getting energy poverty also out of the household, of taking the focus away entirely internal in the household, because one of the things that is a consequence of energy poverty is social exclusion. And so people are not interacting, particularly from low-income households, older generations, with the rest of society. And I think that has huge political implications. And I think that the thing on data that also comes into Carmen, and also some things that Ntabi is going to say. I think that's very important, how we present the data. And I think you mentioned the paper by Fatala and her co-worker. I've read the paper. That it's very easy to criticize from that paper, but there isn't the disaggregated data. That's been the biggest challenge for most of us who've been doing this for a long time. And that's something that we need to think about, is what sort of data, and that will hear, I think, a lot from Carmen. So that's my quick reactions, but great paper, Saska. I say you and I can talk about this some more.
Yes, I think there will be plenty of opportunities in the years to come. Everything moves in very slow waves, as we've those who have been around in gender and energy for a long time. One needs to be patient. But indeed, it's interesting to see that there's so much more research coming up, but also to learn from experience in other countries, and especially I think there's a lot to learn from experience in the global south from that perspective. So Natabi, are you ready to present on your work in South Africa? I see your slides coming up.
Yes.
It would be great if we, if I don't know if you're able to share your video. I know there is an internet provider disruption in the Netherlands at the moment. Hope you're not at my internet provider, but
no, I'm with KPN, not to advertise
okay.
them. I know Delta is
I'm with the
moment.
competition, so if you lose me, then you know.
I know. Yeah.
Please go ahead, Natabi. And again, if there are any questions popping up during her presentation, you can use the chat function, and you can join later for the discussion. There you go.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Saska, for the presentation, very interesting. And yeah, I hope what I'm going to present is going to be interesting as well to everyone that is here. So I've been asked to present on energy poverty and a study that I did a few years ago on the implementation of energy subsidies in South Africa, which I think is also still quite relevant now, especially in the time that we find ourselves in, with regards to COVID. So just without any further ado, maybe if we can go to the next slide, please, just to give you the presentation content. So I'll be looking at energy subsidies and the policies that have been formulated in South Africa for low-income households, which is the free basic electricity subsidy and the free basic alternative energy subsidy. I'll also be talking about energy access and use in South Africa and the focus on low-income households and communities, how we see energy poverty or just the definition based on the South African context. And giving, of course, the figures about the connections, electricity. When I talk about connections, I'm talking about electricity connections on the ground, and whether that means that people have access to electricity or not. And then go back to these policies, which are the measures that have been put in place to mitigate energy poverty. And most importantly, I think it's important to touch on the COVID-19 and the damage that it has caused all over. So I'll touch on that, given again the South African context, just a little bit on that, based on my observations and what's happening at the moment. Also, the big issue, the energy transition. South Africa is also not left behind with that, but also it's quite an important topic when we're talking about energy poverty and gender and energy. So I'll also be touching a bit on that. So the presentation is really quite a number of issues that have been brought together, but that contribute to energy poverty, gender and energy transitions. Next slide, please. So just to give a general definition, and I'm sure most of you can relate to this when we as practitioners and researchers are defining energy poverty, the inability to meet the household's energy needs, mainly due to costs, which of course affect the access and use of energy services, whether it's electricity or being able to have gas in the home or buying paraffin, kerosene and all of that. And it mainly affects the low-income households that, according to research that has been done in most of the countries, is that the lower the income in the household, the less they're able to afford a lot of services, including energy services. And then also that with regards to energy poverty, having access to electricity grid connections it does not necessarily guarantee that the household will be able to use that connection, because they may be cut off due to non-payment and all of that. It also negatively impacts on day-to-day activities, as you can imagine. Households are not able to cook food. And we saw a lot of that as well with COVID-19, where people were given food parcels, but the issue of energy was not thought of or talked about. So you had these households that had these food parcels of food that needs to be cooked, but they were not able to cook it because they couldn't afford energy services or couldn't afford to pay their electricity bill so that they are able to pay to cook the food. Which of course leads to malnutrition. Energy poverty leads to malnutrition. We've seen that with some health facilities that have reported that a lot of children are malnourished because of the type of food that they eat. And that's mainly because their families are not able to cook food, healthy food. Yeah, because it's expensive. It's not only about buying the food, but also being able to pay for the service, the energy service. So that is quite expensive for a lot of low-income households. And It leads also to use of harmful energy sources, such as wood, cow dung, and others. It also limits income generation options for a lot of low-income households, and also decreases the sense of security. We know that with low-income households, they're usually in informal areas. I'm talking again in the context of South Africa. And in these areas, it's more, there's less security where people are living. Next slide, please. So now looking at the policy instruments to alleviate energy poverty in South Africa. I'm sorry. Yeah. Am I in the right slide? It's the policy instrument, sorry. So in 1994, I don't know how much of the South African history the audience knows here, but in 94, South Africa transitioned from an apartheid state to a democratic country, which means that a lot of policies had to be changed as well. So policies had to be pro-poor, with more people having to be given access to services, not only energy, but water, sanitation, housing, and all of that. So one of the policy changes that we saw was the formulation of the South African Energy White Paper of 1998, with the clear objectives that were formulated as follows: to secure energy security through diversity, and to increase access to affordable energy services, stimulate economic development, manage energy-related environmental impacts, and to improve energy governance. I've highlighted the increase to affordable energy services because I feel that that is quite important, and quite important especially to what we're talking to today, because it touches on energy poverty issues. It touches on also the gender and energy component, as we will see through the talk. So with regards to the household energy access and use in South Africa, as of so we have two policies that came out of, after the implementation of the 1998 policy paper that I was talking about right now. Then there was the formulation of two policy papers, the Free Basic Electricity Subsidy document, and the Free Basic Alternative Energy Policy Paper, because with the implementation of the Energy White Paper of 1998, what was realized was that not all the households that were provided with electricity services could afford to pay for them. So it meant that there had to be an intervention. Here you are as government, you have provided electricity to households, and making sure that there's equal spread of connections for all households, and you're trying to make sure that the country has equal services for everyone. But there was this group of people that had already been marginalized for a long time, have been historically disadvantaged, and they didn't have, they were not able to afford electricity as much as what the government had thought would be the case. So it meant that government had to go back to the drawing board, and luckily used the wisdom of, drawing in researchers and other stakeholders to say, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. What do we need to do now? And luckily, I was one of the people that were on the teams that were sent out to do some research to see exactly what was the problem. Why were people not using electricity as much as, to its full capacity? So we found that it was poverty, nothing else, nothing more. Households just couldn't afford to buy electricity credits. In South Africa, we have this prepaid meter. So every month, each customer, or anytime, actually, it doesn't have to be monthly, it can be daily, it can be weekly. So each customer is in charge of how much electricity they are using or they are buying. So they're in charge of getting their own credit. So we found that a lot of households were actually just buying so little electricity that they could only use it for lighting. And that's not because they didn't like using electricity, it's because they couldn't afford to use it. So, so we had to, have a look at what people were using. How much is it that the household, just a small household, could use, and what would be, sufficient for them as an electricity amount to use. So there was the recommendation, after the studies were made and analysis, there was a recommendation that each household could be given a free electricity of 50 kilowatt hours per month of electricity. And then it so happened also with households that didn't have electricity connection. So what do you do with them? So with those, there was a recommendation to provide them with free basic alternative energy services. And those would be, in the form of paying their fee for service for a solar system, or giving them a certain amount of paraffin per month. It also depended on what the each municipality could afford. The next slide, please. So as of 2019, 85% of households in South Africa have formal electricity connections, and this varies from province to province, rural and urban. And this is a high number considering our neighboring countries. If you think of Zimbabwe and other countries that do not have so much electricity connections, and many still rely on, but even while the numbers are so high, many of our households still rely on traditional energy sources and fuels. And the survey that was done in 2019 shows that over 5% of South African households, or 17 million households, use candles as a main source of lighting, which tells a different story. You have 85% of households that have electricity connections, but you still have this 5% that uses candles as the main source of lighting. It means that there is, a disconnect there. So it means that we still have a lot of people that are experiencing energy poverty. Electricity connections and access just do not equal use. This is the point that I was trying to make earlier. And household energy transitions is just not a traditional ladder. Just because you've provided people with electricity, it doesn't mean that they're going to use it. People use the different sources of energy depending on their needs, but also depending on the levels of poverty that they're experiencing. The next slide, please. So just to also look at gender and poverty. So access to energy services depends on their access to income. No matter how much people earn, it depends on having an income to buy that electricity. In South Africa, even though you do have these electricity subsidies where you are given a certain amount of electricity per month, that doesn't last the whole month, and that doesn't enable households to cook for the whole month. So one does need some form of income to be able to use electricity comfortably. So in the global south, there is more prominent unequal access to economic opportunities by men and women due to various contextual factors. And this affects the way women access and use energy services because they have less opportunities at accessing better paying jobs than men. So, and studies show that in the sub-Saharan Africa, employment in the informal sector is dominated by women. And also, this is where up to 600 million people do not have access to electricity. So there's also a need there to balance and make sure that if one is going to provide a service, people that are going to access it have the ability to pay for those services. And one thing that also Joy touched on is that in South Africa, there's no gender disaggregated data, but with regards to the people that are accessing free basic energy and free basic alternative energy subsidies. But there is evidence that these subsidies benefit low-income households, and we see that because of the type of people that are getting these subsidies. just to also touch on, so the next slide, please. Sorry.
Sorry, Bobby, could you slowly round up, because
yes,
time is running out.
Yeah. So this map just shows it's the map of South Africa, and on the right hand side is just a small district where I did my study on the implementation of the free basic alternative energy policy. And on the next slide, please. So these are the recommendations that I came up with for this study. So this was a study conducted for my PhD, but I feel that it's still relevant now in the South African context, because of the issues are still the same. The issues are still there. The issues are still prominent. So the recommendations that came out from there was that there was a need to consider complexities that accompany the implementation process of these policies, of these subsidies, and that different actors at different levels of government have their own motivations, and this influences the implementation process. And this I found because I was interviewing different policymakers and implementers at different levels, and then also at community levels, and like ward councillors and all that, looking at the implementation process of these subsidies and the policies. And then there also needs to be solid and effective evaluation systems in place to monitor implementation. It doesn't help to have these beautiful policies, but not also making sure that they are implemented correctly in order to benefit everyone that needs to benefit from them. And also that household circumstances all over are always changing, especially for low-income earners. It's not it's not clear what the tomorrow will bring. So there's always a change. I know I'm running out of time. But just to have a look at like the impacts of COVID, because I think that is important to also touch on that. So the next slide, please. I look at that. There's been loss of jobs and economic opportunities. In South Africa, the employment rate, which was not good to start with before COVID, but in the fourth quarter of 2020, it's at its record high at 32.5%. So there is quite a big problem there. And many people are relying on government social grants, especially the unemployed and low-income women with children. So there's a child grant that the government gives to women every month, and there are quite a lot of beneficiaries. Millions of women depend on that. And also, like in many countries, COVID has revealed the reality of our poverty levels, that the poor actually depend on the state's assistance. And if it's not there in either any way, shape or form, then a lot of poor people, suffer the consequences. I'd like to go to the next slide, just to show with regards to energy poverty and what.
Gabi, you really need to round up, because we need to
okay.
move. But indeed, I think that touching on this COVID-19 is extremely important, and will definitely also be impacting the interactive part of this workshop.
But just to maybe, if I'd like to ask the slide driver to just put, I just wanted to show our audience that people were so desperate for like having electricity at home that they took to social media like Twitter to beg. You just let your guard down and you go begging for electricity to strangers that are on social media, and the reaction as well that you got from people that were actually buying electricity for people, and this, I think, this this for me, the electricity metering, or this using electricity metering in South Africa was actually, played a good role during this time, because people were able to transfer electricity credits for people. But it also showed that, with COVID-19, it was not only just general poverty that people were suffering from, but there was also, people also suffered from energy poverty. I will stop here because the next slide is also on COVID-19 impacts, and then on energy transitions. But maybe that could come, during discussion, when we talk about energy poverty and just energy transitions. Thank you, and I'm sorry for taking so long.
Well, thank you very much, Nsabi, and indeed extremely interesting also related to the current situation of COVID-19. I think we can all relate to that and make our own observations, but it's intriguing to see how that impacts and what the policy instruments also are to respond to these kind of situations. So definitely fuel for thought and for the discussion later in the workshop. Since we could have talked for many hours, I think, about this topic, but let's move on to Carmen, touching upon her project of energy poverty in Madrid. Before we have a short break and move to the interactive session. Carmen, there you go.
Thank you, Mariel. Thank you both, you and Sergio, for inviting me to this panel, and thank you to my other panel partners for the presentation. What I'm going to present here is some of the results we obtained in this FEMENMAD project. We finished it 1 year ago, and have to say this is a next slide, please, because I was trying to move forward. We were a huge team. This is something important always. This is not my research, but a research of a big group. We are based in the Universidad Politécnica from Madrid, and we made this in collaboration with the Health Institute, Instituto de Salud Carlos III, who made the health analysis. Next, please. We want to assess the gender inequalities that occur in households suffering from energy poverty. For that, we made the general approach for the whole city. Then we tried to disaggregate data by districts. And finally, we made many more things, but I didn't have time to tell everything today. So we will try to end with some recommendation for housing and energy policies. Next, please. This project was based in former work we made for the Madrid City Council, for which we made the study on energy poverty for the city. And in that case, we detected that among our groups at risk of energy poverty, most of them were headed by women. So that's why we decided we could apply for more funds to see how was this phenomenon of feminization of energy poverty. Next, please. So this was the first barrier. As I think Saskia said something related to that, is that we do not have disaggregated data in the statistical databases. So we chose these households in which we could detect the women situation, which were single mother households consisting of women over 65 living alone, and the rest of the households headed by women. Next, please. And if we take a look at the percentage of households at risk of energy poverty within the general population, we can say they were the 23% of households. But if we take a look at these specific households headed by women, next slide, please, we can see that when we talk about single mother households, this number rises till 41%. If we are talking about women over 65, we say they are the 39% at risk of energy poverty, and the rest of households headed by women, this number also rises till the 27%. So at first in this image, we can see that households headed by women already suffer more from energy poverty. Next slide, please. We also tried to geolocate them in the city because we are a group of architects mainly, and we understand energy poverty from the point of taking action on their housing stock, basically. So that's why we developed the HAIR index, which is quite funny. This stands for high energy requirements, and it's calculated on the housing age, the maintenance condition, or living surface, or the availability of heating and cooling facilities. So next slide. We tried to overlap the presence of these households and higher numbers of this HAIR index. And so we can take a quick, and also we overlap it with income levels. These are the main maps for single mother households. I don't expect you to understand them, sorry, but we don't have much time. Next slide, please. Women over 65, and also, next slide, other households headed by women. So what did we get? If you go to next slide, please. We can see that households headed by women, we detected they used to live in older housing. They have a lower presence of air conditioning facilities, and they tend to live in areas of the city with higher urban heat island intensity. If we look at the single mother households, by contrast, they live in more recent housing, but the 50% of these households live under poverty conditions. So the energy poverty they face is slightly different from the rest. And also women over 65 living alone, they have lower pensions than men in all cases, even though some of them live in the wealthiest neighborhoods. Also, they live in old and efficient housing, and also they suffer the highest urban heat island temperatures. Next, please. We also conducted several interviews in collaboration with social housing entities who were already, of course, located in already deprived neighborhoods. Next, please. And what did we obtain? First, regarding housing characteristics, the 75%, they lived in households with damps, broken windows, and lack of insulation. The 88% of them declared having facilities, but only the 38% declared using them. And also the 44% had experienced arrears in utility bills. From the socio-demographic characteristics, basically, they were migrant women living in Spain since 16 years. Their income of the whole households were around 726 euros. They had temporary jobs and very high unemployment rates, and not much of them tend to have unemployment benefits. 66% declared suffering from long-term sicknesses, and the 69% said that regularly they take medication. The 37% related to anxiety, and 25% related to respiratory problems. And also the 20% of these households had a person with disability whose care depended on the interviewed woman. And the 44% of them had suffered gender violence, legally recognized or not. Next slide, please. Some of the conclusions of these interviews, we detected that these women suffered social isolation, and this led them to an individual devaluation of their self-esteem. They felt shame on being failing in caring tasks, which is actually a gender role, and they felt mental block. They felt fear, concern, and anxiety due to their inability to face the situation. And at some point, they had normalized this situation of vulnerability and precariousness. One important thing we found is that we already know there's a segregation of capacities according to gender roles. And we found that these women, usually we are socialized in certain dynamics that do not include experimentation with technology, which reduce independence in dealing with day-to-day situations related to energy equipment. Next slide, please. Also, we record the temperatures in these dwellings. I have to remember these are social housing, depending on some public entity. And here we have the green lines are comfort thresholds. So you can check, we have 4 of the dwellings that spend more than 75% of hours below minimum adequate temperatures. Next, please. And in the bedroom temperatures as well, following the green lines, which are temperature thresholds. 6 of the dwellings spend more than 75% of the hours below minimum habitability conditions. Next, please. So some of the conclusions we get in this project, I've seen in the chat, there are some people interested in that. We're gonna publish in the next days the book, and it's translated, it's in Spanish and English. So if you follow me in Twitter or something like that, you will have access to the book. But some of the conclusions regarding, because we wanted to incorporate the gender mainstreaming in housing and energy policies. That's why we started this project. Well, first, it's been already said, but we need to disaggregate statistical databases. This is the main barrier to analyze women's situations. We need a better characterization of women's situations. We need to establish or to analyze gender roles, the division of tasks, and how it affects energy in household. We need to incorporate the caring activities in the evaluation of households' energy needs. Next, please. We need to develop policies to promote women's technological skills. And this is related, I just say, this is related to the use of the energy in households. So, and we said that we should do that, especially in an early age, through the promotion of training in technical and specific fields. We need to incorporate women's voice in neighborhood interventions. We need to incorporate the care dimension. When I say that, I say the time schedule of meetings, to allocate kids when there's any meeting so women can attend these meetings. It seems kind of stupid, but this is main barrier for participating in these kind of things. Next slide. We need to incorporate women's experience in policies for the intervention in the housing stock, access to energy and sanitation. And finally, all this I hope this will lead us to a sustainable energy transition that recognizes and guarantees the right to energy, and that moves towards a feminist model of society that respects the planet. And thank you very much. That's all. I think more or less I took a little bit more of time. Sorry, Mariel.
No, not at all. I think it's like, no, we see in the reactions in the chat as well. All presentations are extremely interesting and very dense in data and viewpoints. I mean, we could have taken the whole afternoon to discuss these kind of things. I would definitely invite those that are interested to have a look at the different publications of the presenters on which the presentations are based on. Of course, as soon as the FemiMed project is in the public domain, we will make sure through our Twitter accounts and through the conference account as well to share that information with you. Before we take a short break, I would invite Joy to give her reflection through this very enthusiastic and dense presentations. Both cases you know quite well, so looking forward to hear your thoughts about that, Joy.
Well, I won't take too long because I think it's better to go to the group sessions. But I think just very quickly, I think what's been interesting is the presentations have shown the similarities between North and South, that the experiences are quite similar, even though the levels of wealth are different between North and South. And I think one thing that is coming out of COVID is how it is making these things a lot more visible. And I was particularly struck by something Tabi said, which was about how malnutrition is as a consequence of not being able to cook your food properly. And I think those sort of health issues, which also relates to what Carmen was saying about the mental health issues. And I think that these are issues that are now really beginning to emerge. This link between energy and mental health. Although certainly the work of Tanya Winters in Kenya had begun to show that sort of thing as well in the South. So I think that's an important issue there. I think and what I found really quite shocking about South Africa, given that for those of us who are more familiar with the South, we think that, you know, South Africa is one of the leaders. If South Africa is not doing it, then probably nobody else is doing it yet. Despite all the good efforts of South Africa, 5% of households are still using candles. That to me was really a big surprise. And I recall going to a workshop in Liberia a few years ago where women talked about their experience of having to rely on candles. The best thing that could happen with an accident was you got burnt. You know, you've got a burn on your hand. The worst thing was your house got burnt down. And I think that's another worrying issue that is still with us. Carmen, one quick comment on temperature. There is a gender difference in sensitivity to ambient temperature. Women are much more sensitive, apparently, medically speaking, to ambient temperature. It's apparently why there are lots of rows in mixed offices as to who wants it hotter or colder. But really interesting data. I think there's a lot to come out of what you've done. So great, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you all for presenting your amazing work, and especially Joy, thank you for your reflections. For now, the session is not over yet, because we will move after a little break to the interactive sessions. Sergio will introduce the interactive sessions, where also there will be emphasis on health. We can take like 2 minutes max, and then the sessions will run a bit later, until max of 3:40, so that we can take a good time for the breakout session. With that being said, I thank the presenters. They're still here. So after in the plenary discussion, we can still relate to their presentations. Sergio, could you take over?
Yeah. Shall we just a couple of minutes until for a very quick break?
Indeed, yeah. So let's take
until 10 past 3.
Yeah. So let's take 2-3 minutes, and then we are going to the breakout sessions.
Okay, there. So let's continue this session, if that's okay. Thanks for staying with us. I mean, we are running a bit late, as you've seen on the chat, and if that's okay, we'll stay some 10 minutes later. So we have a bit of time to do this practical exercise that Katarina and myself have prepared for you. So my name is Sergio Tirado. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, where I work as research in the EmpowerMed project, which is what I wanted to tell you briefly about today. So I'm here today with my colleague Katarina Havensbrunner, who is a senior expert at Women Engage for a Common Future, which is a partner organization for this project. And because it's an interactive session, we wanted to try to do it. I mean, it's a bit experimental because it's doing it online is challenging. But we wanted to talk about the project that is happening right now, on which Katarina and I both work. Which is what you can see on this first slide: empowerment, empowering women to take action against energy poverty in the Mediterranean. Next slide, please, Rachel. Yeah, if you can click on the, yeah, it's an animated presentation, sorry. So it's a Horizon 2020 funded project, and it's a coordinated support action, which means that there is not so much research, but involved. But it is very much a practice-oriented sort of initiative. So the main aim is to provide support to over 4,000 households, which means roughly over 10,000 people affected by energy poverty in urban areas of the Mediterranean. There are also, we are putting special emphasis on the gender dimensions of energy poverty, and this is, I think, quite unique in this for a Horizon 2020 funded project on energy poverty. The idea is to I'll explain in a minute, practical action in support of these people and households, to assess the impacts and then to influence policy making, namely decision makers, civil society actors, utilities, and health experts are kind of main targets of our policy outreach activities. Please keep this for target groups in mind, because we'll talk about them for the exercise. If you can, Rachel, please click. Yeah. So those are the pilot areas. We have 3 on the Eastern Mediterranean, in Slovenia, Primorska, Zadar, and Vlora in Croatia and Albania. And then on the Western Mediterranean, let's say we have Padova, Marseille, and Barcelona, which is there. And if you can click once more, please. So we also have, these are the 9 partners involved. Each of us is directly, almost each of us is directly involved in the practical implementation of these actions. And then we have WECF, Women Engage for a Common Future, represented by Katarina, my colleague Katarina here, who are based in Germany. You can click again, please. So yeah, those are the basic numbers of the project. We have 6 urban pilots, 9 partners, 7 EU member states. And we have these targets in which all project activities should aim to have at least 60% of women involved, which may seem very crude, but that was, well, the way we found to highlight the sort of gender dimension of the project. And then we have 3 thematic axes: gender in the understanding that women and women-led households are disproportionately affected by energy poverty, but also in recognition that the agency of women to act against energy poverty. The health dimension, I think it was mentioned, it was striking to see the figures that Carmen presented on long-standing sickness and anxiety rates of the people they interviewed in the city of Madrid. And in particular with empowerment, we are emphasizing the mental health dimensions of energy poverty and Mediterranean, in the understanding as well that in countries in the Mediterranean, despite their apparently better climatic conditions, they are more affected by energy poverty as compared to, for instance, Northwestern European countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have the sort of practical actions in support of those 4,000 households are basically household energy visits. This is mostly led by our Central and Eastern European, Eastern Mediterranean colleagues who have substantial experience, especially in Croatia and Slovenia. Focus and DOR, there are two organizations with significant experience going to people's homes, asking them how they're doing quick energy audits and offering advice and even small interventions to for instance, windproof windows, for instance. And then based on the experience of our partner in Barcelona, Engineers Without Border Catalonia, collective advisory assemblies, are a different approach in which you get people together to discuss issues they have at home with paying energy bills, with not being able to, being indebted to utility companies. And so that the collective intelligence of the assembly, which meets every 2 weeks in the case of Barcelona, they can provide advice, very, very practical advice based on people's previous experiences to empower those the newcomers with problems and assist them in improving their living conditions, and also feel listened and supported by people who have gone basically through the same. And there is, I mean, there are also health workshops and do-it-yourself workshops, also as complementary sort of practical actions in support of all those people and households that are being engaged by the project. So I would now pass it over to my colleague Katarina to tell you a bit more about what we want to do today with you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. So I will keep it very short. Yes, so as you have heard, so EmpowerMed is on the one side, it's a women's empowerment project, but we implement activities, but we also work on gender just policy recommendations. And here we developed, we have an intersectional look on gender and energy poverty, and we did it, we collected data for 4 dimensions. So to talk, for example, to policymakers, to utility companies, to health and social practitioners. And on the first part, so we to show and to stress the intersectionality of gender and energy poverty, because it's a topic of gender, but it's also a topic of race, of the socioeconomic situation, of your passport, if you have a handicap, etc., and in which building, for example, you live. And so we collected data on the 4 dimensions, what you see here. And the first one, for example, is a physiological dimension, because we have heard today that age is a significant factor in dealing with energy poverty, for example. So a higher share of women make up the elderly due to longer life expectancy, and the second is also mentioned, for example, that women are more heat and cold sensitive, medically speaking. So we also see some studies showing this. So here that's one part. The second part, what is also a major part of EmpowerMed, it's a health dimension, because here we have impact on the mental health, on the physical health, on the social health. So mental health, increased stress, reduced well-being and comfort, depression, physical health, infections, respiratory, cardiovascular diseases, headache, nausea. And we also see impact on the social health. It's also mentioned today, it could be stigmatization and social isolation, which hinders a normal everyday life, and where women also might be affected. And so, and we also see a higher share of women at risk of poverty and social exclusion. the economic factors. So we know the gender pay gap, we know the gender pension gap, we know the gender care gap, which leads to less income in the period of the work lifetime and also in the pension time. But we also see that women have less time for paid work because of their higher share of unpaid care work at home. And finally, we see the social and cultural roles of women, and we see that the change is not as easy. So the responsibility and the household role, so the gendered division of labor, which assigns women to the responsibility. And we also see that women do not have equal voices on policy, on economy, on household level. Even we have the laws on national levels and also on EU levels. And in summary, so we see that there is a high, maybe next slide, please. I will skip this slide because you will find all this information in our facts and figures. We share the link now. And next slide, please. And finally, in summary, it's evident that women are suffering disproportionately from energy poverty, linked to their physiological and health and economic and social status. That's the outcome, and that is the data. We try to talk to decision makers, for example, to make this obvious interlinkage visible and to bring in gender mainstreaming in all policies. I hand over back to you, Sergio.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for the link to the fact sheet.
I will share it in the chat. Okay.
Yeah. So did you? Oh, sorry. Did you explain the exercise?
Not yet.
Because I think we would need this slide again if we can have it. Yeah. So what we want you to think, everyone to think, is of possible responses to this question. What tailored recommendations can you suggest to address energy poverty? Consider gender dimension through an intersectional approach through these 4 dimensions that Katarina explained: health, physiological, economic, and social, cultural. And having in mind 4 policy outreach target groups: decision makers at the national level, health practitioners, social actors, and utility companies. So what is going to happen now is that Liz and the SE2 team, they are going to split us into several breakout rooms. Each of you will be assigned to one of them. There will be between 6 to 8 people, I think, in each breakout room. And each breakout room will have to answer this question here. And you will have one of these 4 policy outreach target groups to have in mind. So what recommendation would you do to civil society actors based on in response to this question? I think Katarina will also, so Katarina and I will quickly discuss what we've seen on the whiteboards, and then we perhaps open the discussion for Joy and Marielle as well.
Yes, yes, I think it would be great if you can reflect on what you're seeing on the whiteboards. No, we try to put as many sticky notes as possible, and then I would give Joy a couple of minutes to reflect on everything that has been said and done and discussed and presented. I think it's, we could next session, next conference, we will take a full gender day, because I think there's so much to share. And after that, I will pick up for rounding up, and for those who want to stay, can stay. So Sergio, you look like you're really studying all these Post-its.
Yeah, they're very small on my screen. So I'm trying to figure out what people. Yeah, I mean, this is really challenging, to be honest. Yeah, doing this online. Really.
Yeah. Well, maybe because I have a meeting since 10 minutes. Should I go ahead, or because we agreed that I summarize, for example, the recommendations for decision makers and also for utility companies? May I go ahead?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so just for the recommendations on national decision makers, so we see the high need for data collection, which is very important because out of the data, so we can develop recommendations. It's also to have more information about intra-household gender equalities, not to see the household as entity, but also in the household, and to interlink also health and physical points in the discussion of energy poverty. So overall, to include gender mainstreaming in the policy. So we need coherent policy, not only energy and social policy, but also to interlink it, for example, with health policy. That's for national decision makers, and for example, for utility companies. So we had a very interesting discussion. It's that we need more target-oriented services for households to see the topic, because mainly, for example, people engaging households from the perspective of the utility companies, they are from 10 people, 9 are male. So to have a better gender balance, for example. Second point is from the utility perspective, also to invest money, resources, and training in this topic. So to increase gender expertise about these interlinkages, and also to to have better end user engagement and education of the actors who talk to the houses one-to-one. What is, for example, the case in the UK? That would be the very short summary for the 2 target groups.
Yeah, perfect. That, I think I really like that you're trying to reflect the different perspectives of the different actors involved in this topic. So let's see if Sergio can complement that.
Very quickly. So about health, a couple of issues that I've picked from what I've seen very on the whiteboards. One is that it's not very clear whether health practitioners are very aware of energy poverty, something determining health, and beyond that, whether they are aware of gender differences related to the health impacts of energy poverty. Then, as I was saying before, I think mental health is typically underexplored. There is not much about that so far. And again, I suspect that there are very significant gender differences. What Carmen was telling us about the incidence of anxiety among energy poor women in Madrid is a very clear example of that. Speaking of social actors, perhaps civil society organizations need to understand that energy poverty is not just material deprivation, which is of course very important, but also an emotional experience, something that Saskia highlighted. And because of the gender, the role difference in what men and women are doing in the household, the emotional experience of energy poverty may be different inside the household. And I also I would like highlight this. Someone put a sticky note on grandparents and extended family. Perhaps, I mean, something that you, Marielle, emphasized from the very beginning for this session. Like there's a bit of the dictatorship of the household as a unit of analysis, and we need to go beyond that. I mean, inside the household, but also beyond the household, in the sense that grandparents, for instance, are very much in charge of care work, and there are again gender differences between women and men when you look at the extended family beyond the household.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Sergio. Indeed, no, it's we should acknowledge that the household is not existing. No? There's a lot of fluidity as well, and what we see, for example, is what we call the sandwich generation, the generation that takes care both of their children and their parents. So you see a lot of multi-generational households, and yeah, that comes also with their own challenges. Well, and then we should not forget about the impact of COVID, like Natabi already mentioned. And I think us as energy poverty researchers, well, are quite anxious about the aftermath. And in that sense that we see existing inequalities increasing. And yeah, that's something to be worried about, and to use our knowledge and impact for policymakers as well, to come up with adequate policy instruments to support those households. So yeah, so thank you very much for putting all these sticky notes. The whiteboards will be used in further development of the projects, and so that's a very valid information. And then I would like to give the floor to Joy to reflect on what have been said, or what she picked up in today's presentations from her perspective.
Oh, in 2 minutes, huh? All right,
well,
okay.
you know how many minutes you've got.
2 hours? No, I think it's been a really great session. I mean, I have been doing this for a few years, and yet there's always something new to learn. And I think that's what I enjoyed very much today, but also to bring together people from different perspectives, or different geographies, as you could also say. And I think there's a lot for cross learning. I think that to me would be one of the things to take home. And I think also, Saskia, something I wanted to come back to, on something you inadvertently did. I think it's about the way of visualization, about the way we present these issues. And I think without realizing it, your own presentation actually showed some of those things about the way. And well, we can think about the way the UK government, which is embarrassing in many ways, showed pictures to do with COVID and home care. They were all women, all in, even though they were sort of graphics, they were always women's bodies who were doing the caring in the home. So that I think visualization is very important, the way it creates our own perceptions. I'll just say just a couple of added-ons on what we just heard now. I would be very careful on this box ticking of numbers. Of numbers of women on boards, numbers of women doing this, doing that. One, they have to be of quality, because if they fail because they're a woman, and not because they're not good at their job. Right? So I think be very careful about that. Also, women are not always sympathetic to other women. And a classic example also from the UK is Margaret Thatcher. So yes, not a great sister was Mrs. Thatcher. And I would also say that if you put too much emphasis on the numbers, it puts all the emphasis on women being then responsible for gender equality. And gender equality is a joint responsibility. And all sorts of equality then are also joint responsibilities, whether it's to do with disabilities or to do with sexual orientation. It's all our responsibilities. So just be careful on the numbers game. And Sergio, I think one of the things you're saying about awareness, I think that's the big game. That's what in Europe we've been trying to do for quite some time, is to get policymakers aware that energy poverty exists in Europe. And then the next issue is then they're left with, how do I do it? And I think that's also something. I mean, there's another EU project going on in the Netherlands, which I just listened to last week, in which the people at the municipality level, they don't know now, what do I do? Now I know this issue is there, what do I do? And I think that's the next exciting thing to move with. And I think the data from Carmen's group is really, really important to the way of that mapping within the municipality of Madrid. And I think that sets a really good example for somebody from a municipality. Oh, this is something I know I can do. It's within my capabilities. So thanks very much indeed, everybody. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else has. So good, great stuff.
Yes, indeed. No, there's it's an interesting to follow that energy poverty is getting more and more support from policymakers at different levels and across Europe. So, well, hopefully at some years we will not need an energy poverty conference anymore, and there will only be historians talking about energy poverty. Well, I know from a gender perspective that will take such a long time. So we will not be without work for any time soon in that perspective. I think there's a lot we can take from here. It would normally be great to continue networking and share with each other about our ongoing research from our own perspectives, because I think that is that was also stressed today. We need research from different disciplines with different methodology. Now, somewhere I saw a sticky note of mixed methods. Indeed, I think that would reflect, give better reflection of the inequalities and injustices at the moment in society, impacting energy transition on both policymakers, but also in the energy companies and the energy users itself. So I would actually think that it's a good time for those that are still here who have burning questions to unmute yourself and ask that question. I know there are people that need to leave. If you want to leave, please do so. Thank you very, very much for your contribution. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Natabi, Saska, and Carmen, Sergio, and Katrin for your contributions, and thank all the participants for staying with us, even though we needed extra time. And thank you so much for your participation.